Shadows twist where whispers grow. The edge of light begins to flow. A world unseen through fractured glass, where futures meet the echoes past. Step closer now, the veil is thin. A riddle starts where dreams begin. The experimental medium calls your name. Nothing here will be the same.
Welcome to the Experimental Medium Podcast. Today we're plunging into a really extraordinary case.
Oh, definitely.
The story of Mrs. Piper. She was an American medium, and the Society for Psychical Research, the SPR, they investigated her just exhaustively.
They really did. Started way back in 1887, and it went on for years and years.
Yeah, stacks of material. And our mission today really is to unpack what made her case so different, so unique.
And what it might tell us, about the mind or maybe something else.
Exactly, because what's fascinating, and you see this right away in the reports, is just the sheer detail.
The volume of it. It wasn't just a couple of séances.
No, this was sustained investigation, meticulous records. I mean, it became a benchmark case, didn't it?
It really did. Even for people who were, let's say, very skeptical about this sort of thing, orthodox psychologists, eventually they had to admit something odd was going on.
And Mrs. Piper herself, she seems quite different from some of the more showy mediums of that era.
That comes across strongly. The accounts suggest she was genuinely willing to be studied under scientific controls.
Which wasn't always the case with mediums then.
Not at all. That willingness, that apparent good faith, it adds a layer of credibility right from the start.
Okay, so let's dive in. How did this actually manifest, the mediumship? Let's start with the trance.
Yeah.
How did she go into it?
Well, it was quite distinct. Not some big performance. Often it was spontaneous. Sometimes just needing someone to hold her hand was enough.
Simple as that.
Seemingly. And observers, people like Rishi J., Oliver Lodge, they noted these clear physical changes.
Like what?
Slight spasms, convulsions almost, sometimes described as a very mild epileptiform attack.
Okay.
Then she'd fall into this deep stupor, heavy breathing, stertorous breathing, and then quite suddenly,
A change.
a complete change, especially the voice. That was the first thing people noticed.
And that's where the idea of controls comes in, right? These personalities.
Exactly. Spirit personalities, supposedly, that were believed to sort of take over and speak through her.
And one of the main early ones was Dr. Finuit.
Dr. Finuit, yes. He was a dominant figure early on, described as having this loud, very masculine voice.
And a strange way of talking.
Very peculiar. A mix, they said, of Negro patois, French, and American dialect. Quite a character.
Wow. So communication started with the voice then.
Primarily, yes. Finuit and the others spoke through her, but then, over time, automatic writing developed.
Writing while she was in trance.
Yes. And interestingly, for a while, she apparently did both at the same time, speaking and writing.
That's odd, like two streams of information.
Almost, yeah. Eventually, though, the writing became the main channel,
Yeah.
just with her right hand.
Can you picture it? Her body inert, maybe slumped on cushions, but that right arm just scribbling away rapidly
Yeah.
gives you a real sense of dissociation.
It does. Like, the arm is acting independently. Now, before Finuit really took center stage, there were others who claimed to communicate.
Oh, right, the early crowd.
Yes, quite a lineup. You had Mrs. Siddons, the actress,
Famous actress.
Johann Sebastian Bach,
The composer, really?
apparently, Longfellow the poet, Commodore Vanderbilt,
De Tacun.
and an Italian girl, Loretta Pancini. It's quite the guest list from the other side, isn't it?
It certainly is. And Finuit, initially, he had a very specific remit, didn't he?
He did. He apparently felt it was beneath him to deal with anything but medical issues, diagnoses, advice, that sort of thing.
So, not general chit-chat.
Not at first. The story goes that Bach and his friends had to persuade him to broaden his scope, answer other questions, discuss different topics.
Interesting. Okay, so who started seriously looking into all this? Professor William James was early, wasn't he?
Yes, William James. His involvement is key. Around 1885, 1886. And crucially, he started out skeptical.
Which is where you'd want a scientific investigator to start.
Absolutely, but his own sittings, and especially some of the information that came through, well, it chipped away at that skepticism.
He started thinking there was something genuinely mysterious happening.
He did. Even though, admittedly, those first investigations weren't maybe as buttoned down control-wise as they later became.
But they produced some amazing anecdotes, like his mother-in-law, Mrs. Gibbons.
Yes. She was apparently also quite skeptical, but the story goes she was deeply impressed by some very private family details that Finuit revealed. Things Mrs. Piper couldn't possibly know.
And the Italian letter experiment. That sounds fascinating.
Oh, that's a classic one. Mrs. Piper knew zero Italian, absolutely none.
Right.
Yet Finuit supposedly could give correct details about the writer of an Italian letter just by having it placed on her forehead.
And the writer wasn't well known?
Hardly known at all. Only by 2 people in the U.S. at the time, apparently. That makes it very hard to explain through normal means.
It really does.
Yeah.
And what about how names came through? That sounded strange.
Yeah, the description suggests it was like names were being almost shouted at Finuit from a distance.
Leading to mistakes.
Exactly. Mangled pronunciations, like Niblin or Giblin for Gibbons or Heron for Herman. They'd often get it wrong, then correct it.
Like a noisy phone line or something.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
An imperfect transmission. And it wasn't just names. There are instances that looked a lot like clairvoyance, such as...
Well, finding Mrs. Gibbons's lost bank book, that's pretty specific.
Definitely.
Then there was information about a family, the Fs, who'd lost a child. Finuit got the sex wrong initially, but corrected it later. Still, knowing about the loss at all.
And other things.
Details about someone's daughter having back pain. Predicting an aunt's death in New York, though maybe that was expected, it's hard to say.
Okay.
But then there's the really specific, slightly weird detail about killing a gray and white cat with ether.
Ether. That's
Right.
very specific.
It is, and again, stuff Mrs. Piper just wouldn't normally have access to. It makes you pause, doesn't it?
It really does. And Finuit would ask for objects belonging to the sitters.
Yes, he often did. Said he needed to feel their influence.
Influence, like psychometry. Kind of implies that, yeah, this idea that objects retain some connection to their owners, it's a recurring theme.
Okay, so James is intrigued. But the investigation really ramps up with Dr. Hodgson, right?
Oh, absolutely. Dr. Richard Hodgson, his involvement is pivotal. He studied her for something like 15 years.
15 years.
And crucially, remember his background. This guy was a debunker.
Right. He had exposed Madame Blavatsky.
And looked into Eusapia Palladino. He was known for finding fraud.
Right.
He had a sharp, critical mind.
So he wasn't predisposed to believe this stuff.
Not in the slightest.
Right.
So when someone like Hodgson dedicates that much time and ultimately says, look, I can't explain this away as fraud, that carries immense weight.
What sort of precautions did he take?
A lot. Sitters were brought in under false names.
So Piper wouldn't know who they were.
Exactly. He hired detectives to tail Mr. and Mrs. Piper, check if they were doing any background research.
Okay.
Nothing. They found absolutely nothing suspicious, looked at their mail, everything.
That's thorough.
Extremely. And often the sitters were only introduced right before the trance, or sometimes even after she'd gone under.
Making prior research pretty much impossible.
Very, very unlikely. And it wasn't just Hodgson. Professor Lodge did his own independent tests in Liverpool.
Sir Oliver Lodge, the physicist.
That's him. Also highly respected, also initially skeptical. He was just as rigorous.
What did he do?
Searched her luggage when she arrived, read the few letters she had, made sure the household servants were new, and knew nothing about his family's private life.
Covering all bases.
Totally. Mrs. Lodge was apparently very careful about what she said in Mrs. Piper's hearing. They even locked away family photo albums and records.
And the result.
Some result. Intense scrutiny by skeptical people and no fraud discovered.
Now, what about muscle reading? That's often suggested. You know, unconsciously guiding the medium's hand or responses through tiny movements.
That was definitely considered. But both Lodge and later Professor Hyslop argued strongly against it in Piper's case. Because there were many times when she gave accurate information without any physical contact with the sitter.
Ah, okay.
Lodge noted she'd sometimes let go of the sitter's hands for ages, but the information kept coming. Hyslop, in his experiments, was even stricter, deliberately avoided any physical touch.
And she still got things right.
Apparently so, which, makes muscle reading a very difficult explanation to maintain.
Okay, so if fraud and muscle reading seem unlikely, according to these investigators,
Yeah.
we're back to the controls. Finuit especially, was he reliable?
Well, that's where it gets complicated again. There's debate about who or what Phinuit even was.
Like his origin.
Yes. There's this intriguing possible link to another medium, J.R. Koch, who was blind. Koch had a control named Albert G. Finnett.
Finnett. Finnett. Sounds similar.
The phonetic resemblance is striking, isn't it? It led to speculation that maybe Koch somehow passed his control on to Piper during sittings they had.
Did Phinuit confirm this?
No, he always denied knowing Finnett, and Phinuit's own story about himself was, well, messy.
Inconsistent.
Very. The spelling of his name changed. He gave different birth and death dates. His claims about studying medicine in Paris or Metz in Germany, they seemed dubious on investigation. Even basic facts, like whether he had a sister or a wife named Josephine, the story kept shifting. It felt like he was improvising.
Not very spirit doctor-like?
Not always, no. And his language could be quite mundane, sometimes even crude or trivial.
And mischievous. Didn't he call Lodge captain?
He did,
Yeah.
constantly called him captain. It adds to this picture of a rather unreliable, complex character. Doesn't fit the solemn spirit image neatly at all.
Does that inconsistency undermine the evidence for genuine communication?
It certainly makes you question the source. Look at the Hannah Wildletter case. Phinuit got almost everything wrong.
Right.
Or Mrs. Blodgett's sitting, she was sharp. She noticed Phinuit only gave correct details about things she was actively thinking about. If she didn't know something or wasn't thinking about it, he was wrong or silent.
Suggesting.
Telepathy.
From the sitter.
That's what it strongly suggested to her. Or maybe from others present. She actually concluded she was basically talking to her own subconscious, externalized somehow.
So Phinuit might have been more of a reflection or a telepathic construct in those cases.
It's a plausible interpretation for some sittings, definitely. And Phinuit's own influence theory, getting info from objects, well, it's interesting, but it doesn't quite cover all the hits or the misses. It leaves Phinuit very ambiguous.
But then things changed, didn't they, with George Pelham?
Ah, yes, George Pelham, or GP. His arrival marks a really significant shift.
Who was he?
He claimed to be a friend of Dr. Hodgson's, who had recently died. Real person, known identity.
Unlike Phinuit.
Exactly. GP had a background in literature, philosophy. And interestingly, he'd been skeptical about psychic stuff himself when alive.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a quote attributed to him saying if he found himself still existing after death, he'd make things lively, trying to communicate.
And did he?
Well, his appearance coincided with automatic writing becoming the main communication method.
So, less Phinuit speaking. More writing from Pelham.
Increasingly so. And the dynamic was strange. Sometimes Phinuit would still be speaking, apparently unaware of what GP was writing through the hand.
Wow. Two different things seemingly happening through the same person.
It suggests a really complex process going on, and later Phinuit faded further and was largely replaced by a different group.
The Imperator group.
That's right. Imperator, Rector, Doctor, Prudens. Names familiar from other mediumship cases, actually, like Stainton Moses.
And Pelham interacted with them.
He did, and apparently had opinions. He reportedly disagreed with some of Stainton Moses's doctrines, even questioned his clarity. It's like spiritual politics or something.
Hey, backstage gossip from the beyond.
Sort of. And this Imperator group, they demanded sort of exclusive control of the medium's light, they called it.
And what happened then?
The claim is that the communications became much more coherent, clearer, more accurate, fewer of the Phinuit-style errors and trivialities.
And did Mrs. Piper's trance change too?
It apparently did. Became much quieter, less physical drama, fewer convulsions, more peaceful.
Okay, so we have this evolution, which brings us to Professor Hislop's work. James Hervey Hislop.
Yes, another major investigator, professor of logic and ethics, very scientifically minded. His investigations were incredibly rigorous.
Even more so than Hodgson's or Lodge's.
Arguably, yes, especially regarding eliminating sensory cues. He took extreme precautions.
Like what?
Concealed his identity completely at first, wore a mask during sittings, altered his voice, absolutely no physical contact, and framed his questions very carefully to be non-suggestive.
Trying to get the purest possible communication, untainted by expectation.
Exactly, purely evidential. And during his sittings, a communicator claiming to be his deceased father, Robert Hyslop, came through.
With specific details.
Remarkably specific. Mentioned his father's spinal problems, using a crutch or stick, a slight stroke that had affected his hearing in one ear, the loss of his voice likely due to laryngeal cancer.
Wow, those are precise medical details.
They were. Things James Hyslop was certain Mrs. Piper couldn't know. The communicator also recognized other family members, referred to specific incidents from their lives.
It's that kind of specific, verifiable detail that's hard to dismiss, isn't it?
It really is. Of course, there were still confusions. There was an episode with a family friend, Dr. Joseph Cooper, who was first named as Samuel Cooper.
So, still not perfect transmission.
No. And a really interesting misunderstanding about the word trouble regarding his father's final illness. The father apparently thought it was just catarrh, while the symptoms described sounded more like the cancer. Shows the communicator's perspective might differ from the objective facts.
Fascinating. What else came through from the father?
Recalling that James, the professor, was the last person he spoke to. Trying to remember the odd name of some medicine James had sent him from New York.
These little personal details.
They add up. And Hyslop noted something interesting. Communication seemed easier, more fluid, when he dropped the formal questioning and just talked more naturally, more conversationally.
Maybe the spirits respond better to that.
Perhaps. It suggests the interaction itself matters. And Pelham, the GP control, also claimed he could sometimes see living people at a distance and report what they were doing.
Like remote viewing.
Something like that. Though the accuracy varied, apparently depending on how mentally focused the person being observed was. Another really strange phenomenon.
So looking back at the whole Piper case,
Yeah.
decades of study, tons of records, what are the big takeaways or lingering questions? People often object to the triviality of some messages, right?
That's a common criticism of mediumship generally, yes.
Yeah.
Why are spirits talking about lost keys?
Exactly.
And it's a fair point. Some messages were mundane, possible explanations, maybe communication is difficult, imperfect, maybe not all communicators are profound thinkers, or, as you said, maybe reflects limitations.
But countering that, you have the consistency of the control's personalities over years. Finuit was Finuit, GP was GP.
Right, that persistence argues against it just being, say, telepathy from random sitters, which might produce more variable results. These felt like distinct personalities, however flawed.
And the vision at a distance thing, that also doesn't fit neatly into simple telepathy between sitter and medium.
No, it suggests something more external. And maybe the errors and confusions aren't just noise. Maybe they actually support the idea of individual finite minds trying to communicate rather than some all-knowing telepathic field. Finite beings make mistakes.
That's an interesting way to frame the errors. And what about those moments when she was waking up? The head snaps, the fragments of speech.
Yes. Observers noted that as she came out of trance, she'd often have these sudden head movements and utter disconnected words or phrases, often names or topics that had come up during the sitting.
Like echoes from the trance state.
Almost.
Yeah.
Like fragments clinging to her as she transitioned back to normal consciousness. It's another one of those peculiar details that adds to the overall mystery.
So when you pull it all together, Mrs. Piper is just extraordinary. The sheer volume of phenomena, the complexity.
Well, quality of the investigation. James, Hodgson, Lodge, Hyslop. These were serious, intelligent people really grappling with something they couldn't easily explain. Their interpretations differed, of course, but they agreed something genuine was happening.
Which leaves us, and our listeners, with that big question, doesn't it? What was Mrs. Piper? An anomaly of the human mind, showing abilities we barely understand. Telepathy, clairvoyance, maybe something else.
Or was she, as she seemed to believe, a genuine channel? A medium connecting with other intelligences? Or maybe some complex combination we can't even quite imagine?
The evidence is there, it's detailed, it's provocative, it certainly defies easy answers.
It really does. It pushes you to think about consciousness, communication, what's possible.
We definitely encourage anyone interested to look at the original SPR reports. They are dense, but fascinating. And just ponder, what do you make of the experimental medium, Mrs. Piper?
Shadows twist where whispers grow. The edge of light begins to flow.